Okay. Hi, my name is Scott Benson. Thanks for coming out. I worked on this game, Night in the Woods. I was the co-creator, co-writer, artist, animator, just some other stuff. It's an indie game. Everyone does everything at some point. Thanks everyone for coming. I thought maybe 5 people were going to come out to this, and there's at least 6 or 7. Which is fantastic. This is good. Audience interaction is great because there's going to be some jokes. There's some people from the Night in the Woods team here. You're kind of just getting my take on it. But anyone who worked on Night in the Woods, can you raise your hands? OK. Thank you. Well, now that that's over with, so Night in the Woods is the first game I ever worked on. This is my first time giving a talk at GDC. You may be shocked to find out. And so I should say up front that this talk would be different if someone else was giving the talk. Like with Alec, you'd probably get more like of the technical design aspect of it, and kind of he's the coder and the composer on it, the co-creator of it, so you kind of get his take on it. With Bethany. She's the co-writer on it. You'd get a take more on the history and kind of where she's from and her experiences that make up a lot of kind of the bedrock of a lot of what ended up in the game. With Anna and Becca, our publishers at Finji, right there, you'd hear a lot of horror stories about trying to adjust deadlines and kind of trying to herd the cats across the cat field or whatever. Let's see here, John Manning is here. You'd hear about like Yarn Spinner and some of like the cool solutions with Yarn, the dialogue system that we ended up using and creating, I guess, throughout this. And Em, who's there too, you'd hear about like her fantastic work on like the sound design. But you are unfortunately stuck with me for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm gonna give a warning for anyone who's watching this talk later. It's probably gonna be a little cursing because I'm gonna get excited and it's just gonna happen. And I think there's one slide that has a swear word in it. And So like I said, Night in the Woods is the first game I ever worked on. I'm not a developer with like years and years of like strings of successes. I was like some like dumb punk kid artist who like years later like stumbled into making a video game and it just kind of went well. So that's why you have to hear from me. Also, we have a lot to get through, and I don't know if I can fit this into the time, so let's get going. Wait, I skipped slides already. Hi, that was supposed to go before. And this is the name of the title of the thing. Of the talk. All right, part 1. So travel back with me, if you will, to twitter.com. June 3rd, 2013. Alec Holoka, who co-created this game, Aquaria. They actually won awards at the IGF here 25 years ago. How long ago was it, Alec? 25 years ago. And 25 years ago, back when the IGF was, all ColecoVision, and they made this amazing game. And so he contacted me and said, "Hey, you're funny and on Twitter, and I like some of your animation work. Would you like to make a video game?" And I was an independent animator, just doing like indie animation, like contract work, illustration, kind of trying to get by. I was self-taught, didn't go to college, this is like the end of a long line of like us just trying to get by, and I ended up kind of accidentally falling into doing animation and stuff. Right before this, I'd helped co-found an international independent animation collective called Late Night Work Club. A guy named Jake Armstrong did that logo. My logo for it's just way worse, so I put that one up there. You can go to latenightworkclub.com and check out our stuff. It's all free and it's all good. So when Alec asked if I wanted to make a video game, I was like, I guess like the year before or so, I'd played a game called Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery, which is a brilliant, amazing game. And before then, video games were kind of like, I know, for example, like people make rockets and go to like the moon and stuff, but I have no idea how to do that. And video games were kind of like that. Like I'd wanted to, since I was a kid, I was interested in game design and just, like I liked games a lot, kind of just as an art form, and also just for like fun. But I had never had any idea what to do with them or what I could do with them at all. But Sword and Sorcery, which I loved, it kind of pitched itself in its credits as like a collaboration between a dev team and an artist and a musician. And I was like, oh, wait, I can do one of those. I was like, oh, there's like a mixed media collaboration or something. Like, in like my past, it would be like, oh, someone does like a little comic zine, and then like a band records like a 7-inch or something with it, and you put them together, and it's this mixed media collaboration project. And I was like, I get that. And Sword and Sorcery, at least for me, gave me permission, not in the sense that it's like, not in the like authority figure sense where someone says, okay, now you can do this, but in the sense of like when someone says, demonstrates to you, or out and out says, hey, you can do this, you know? There's something that you have to offer. Or in other parts of your life, it's like, you can be this, you can think this, you can feel this way. Sometimes you just need someone to go, oh, yeah, you can do that, that's valid. So Alex sent me an email. This is an actual email. And our ambitions at the front were really funny. I'm going to do a dramatic reading of this real quick. Alakaloka. I don't have a plan or anything, but I think it'd be cool to make like an atmospheric exploration, chilled out, moody type thing for iPad. Maybe non-linear, but some story elements. Love your art style and animation in the Vine you just posted. Here's me. Psh, no plan? Yeah, I'd love to. I know next to nothing about how to create for this medium, but I would love to do something. Been trying to edge in that direction and would love the experience. And making cool stuff is cool. Thanks, Scott. Also, thanks. The clip is part of blah, blah, blah. Alakaloka, we should start up a Google Doc and brainstorm. See what comes to mind? And I said, sounds good. And that was basically how that started. So we worked for a while, like a few months in that summer, kind of coming up with like this thing. It was like this atmospheric, kind of mystical, like silent protagonist. She had like a little cape that fluttered when you jumped. There was probably going to be some just like kind of like very nice mystical stuff, some storybooky elements. Probably going to be some like humming ancient obelisks. All this stuff. This is just what you did in indie games in 2013. So we're doing that, but like we kind of weren't feeling it. It was cool, but like it wasn't like really grabbing us. And then this one night, in I think it was like August of 2013, I was sitting there. I'm just gonna like it was thunderstorming outside, humid rainstorm in Pittsburgh. You know, lightning crash, just so you can get the idea. And I was watching this really like great art movie called Return of the Living Dead, and it's a fantastic movie. It's a cinematic masterpiece. And I was sitting there and I was thinking like, this game is cool. I want to make this game, and Alex cool, and like I don't know what to do. Like maybe all my ideas are bad and stuff. And then I was watching it, and so Return of the Living Dead has these great, like these punks that only existed in 80s movies, which are great. They all have names like, you know, like I'm Thrash, I'm Suicide, I'm Razor, you know. Like they're being like, man, this isn't just a costume, this is my way of life, and it's great. And then they fight zombies, and it's fantastic. And I was like, it reminded me of kind of like the punk kids that like I kind of came up with, and like the punk adults that Bethany and I kind of rolled around with. And I was like, man, no one makes games about us. And so I was like, wow, maybe we could do something with like that. But I wasn't good at drawing people. I was good at drawing animal people, like kind of little cartoon people. I was like a huge Richard Scarry fan when I was a kid. And also like, I liked them in kind of like a subversive way. I saw this flyer like 13 years ago. And I was like, it just like was like such a cool thing of taking these kind of like early, like, you know, 20s, 30s kind of like cartoon animal people and then like putting them in this context. There was like a level of like kind of like playful subversiveness that I liked. And so I started drawing little animal people too. And I was like, maybe I could kind of come up with some stuff or whatever. And so I just sketched out these characters, and they basically didn't change until we shipped the game. This is the first sketches of them. And I sent this to well, I didn't send this to Alec yet. Around about that time, too, I just recently played a game called Kentucky Route Zero. Drink every time this game is mentioned in this talk. And what was cool about Kentucky Route Zero is, you know, Bethany is from Central Pennsylvania. I've lived in Western Pennsylvania for half my life. So it's just kind of part of, like, who we are. And we, Kentucky Route Zero was one of the first games where I was like, oh, I know that place. Not Kentucky, but these kind of off-the-highway places that are kind of like in the general Appalachia region. There was just so much there. There's so much like truth to it, and so much like, okay, so for example, the only times I think I'd seen Pittsburgh in video games beforehand were, so there's The Last of Us, and it's in a big post-apocalyptic ruin, and you're fighting people, and there's monsters and stuff. It's a great game, but it's not exactly the most positive depiction of Western Pennsylvania. The only other time I'd seen Pittsburgh in a game was The Pit, Fallout 3, which it's not. It's a slightly exaggerated version of Pittsburgh. A lot of just wrought iron and people killing each other and being generally unhappy. So like I hadn't seen a lot of representation of like our area and kind of just the people that live there. This guy lives next door to us, and there, so I was like, oh, it'd be cool. And I was like, similarly with the characters, I was like, man, no one makes games about where we're from or something. So I was like, hey, why don't we do that? Like, that would be cool. So I wrote up this like little pitch thing to Alec, and I was like, oh yeah, here's some sketches, here's some ideas, here's like kind of what the story would be, and I sent it, and I was like, this sucks, this is gonna end now because all my ideas are stupid. And then Alec's like, no, that's better, let's do this. And so so we kind of embarked on this like really, really quickly. I'm scrolling my notes here, check this out. The game design vogue at that point, I think, was to make these kind of very minimal stripped down experiences, you know, like silent protagonist, the protagonist talks, it's in kind of like runes. It was like super cool. And also a lot of it was like hone down your mechanics to like one thing, this kind of minimalist, almost like Apple product design of games. And that's really cool, like some of my favorite games are like that. But we were like, no, actually, let's make a game where no one shuts up ever. A big busy town, lots of people who again just never shut up. Lots of writing that in no way efficiently points the player to the next destination as quickly as possible. And just this big kind of shaggy thing that kind of was just like there. It was like kind of full of life and full of energy, and we were going to tack on all these things to it. And we kind of just threw up these designs like really, really quick. And these are the original two concept things. I'm cycling between them. This is very cool. And so we kind of slapped together this the version of May's Street. That's May, our main character. That's Steve Scriggins, who's a jerk. And we were like, oh, we want this town that you can walk around, this huge world. We want to make this big world that you can explore. And we also knew that we wanted you to spend a lot of time in these places going back and forth. That was like a part of the game that we wanted to do. Like it was part of a routine. I think Alec used the term ritual early on, these kind of like building these rituals and building these routines like you kind of do in real life. But we're like, it's going to be kind of a drag just to walk back and forth. So the game became a platformer, like because jumping is fun, basically. It's like if you ever play like Fallout or like any of the Bethesda open world RPGs, like I never walk in those games. I'm constantly just bounding along the ground. I'm like the savior of the universe, just here he comes, you know? And but like with that, we'll come back to this in a little bit, but you could be expressive. You could be like, oh, I'm like hopping down the street and bouncing off of cars and bouncing off of mailboxes and all that. And that was pretty cool. And we also wanted to build, that also now enabled us to build up. So now we can make tall buildings and hide things in the windows and do all that kind of stuff. And so soon May was bouncing along those power lines. And that was how that kind of came to be. At the same time, we knew that there was going to be a lot of talking, for lack of better words. And kind of coming out of animation and having friends that were in like independent comics and like zine making and stuff, I wanted to do something that was more interesting than just like a kind of a text box out front. Because text boxes can be a little stale sometimes, and they can also kind of distance you. It's like, here's the game down there, and then here's you, and then the text box is somewhere in here, and there's like this distancing. We didn't want to do that. We wanted the word bubbles to feel like they were part of the environment. So I kind of sketched out this like, these bubbly little comic-y word bubbles, and this little waggly font, and Alec kind of mocked something up, this really great thing of like generating and doing various things with those. Which is really, really cool. And we knew at that point that there were certain themes that we wanted to tackle. Like all of us had dealt with, mental health issues in our life, had dealt with depression. I had dealt with something called dissociation, which I actually didn't know was a word until we started making this game. And someone's like, oh, that thing that you're talking about, this dissociation. I was like, wow. And there was that. Also, all of us had been involved with the church in the past and had since lost our faith. And all of us we were all in our early 30s at the time. Now we're very old, and we had some distance on the time period of May's life. She's around 20, and we felt like, oh, we could comment on that now. We have some distance on it, and there's some similarities between that time in life and the time that we are in our lives, too. It's this transitional moment. May is like when you're 20. You're not a teenager anymore, but you're not quite an adult. People expect you to have responsibilities, but aren't super taking you seriously enough to sell you alcohol, at least in the US. So we had these kind of themes, and they would grow and change, which we'll get into a little bit later. But with that and the dialogue and the moving around, we kind of had the basic building blocks of this thing. Now, it's funny because people consider Night in the Woods at times like a nostalgia piece. We have, like, none of us who were making the game had like, a lot of nostalgia for this time period in our lives. And actually, a lot of the game thematically is about how nostalgia can kill, and nostalgia can really be a very bad thing, just even like on a societal level. It was just something that we felt like we could explore at that time, and I'm kind of glad we did, because we went to some interesting places with it. So Bethany and I were like broken in debt at the time, and Alec was like, "Okay, cool, we're using Unity. We should all get like Unity license." And I was like, "We don't have any money for," and this is before Unity was free for a while. I actually don't know what it costs now, but back then it cost $25,000, and we could not. It didn't, but we couldn't afford it, at least, and I couldn't afford to take any time off of trying to find work to do it. And Alec was like, "Hey, let's do a Kickstarter." And I was like, "That's not going to work." And he was like, "Let's try it anyway." And we're like, "Okay." So in the process of doing that, we had to mock up a whole bunch of scenes, which means that we had to do a lot of decision making right up front about what this game was going to be. So one of the good things and very bad things about Kickstarter is that you have to make a commitment of, this is what our game is like, up front. But we mocked these things up, and Alec made this really great trailer track, and it kind of started to take shape. Just these ideas, there was a feeling that was kind of coming out of it that was a little different than we had first thought about. There's moments in a project or any sort of idea where it starts becoming what it's going to be, and that happens a lot of, it's not like, we had this idea, and then 3 years later we spit out the best version of it. It's like, it evolves, it grows and changes. And we were able to kind of talk about the vibe of it kind of started coming through, of the town and where it was and what people were dealing with. And so I was like, yeah, our trailer's cool and everything, but no one's gonna buy our weird no one's gonna be into our weird animal people in the Rust Belt game. This wasn't a huge This wasn't a huge selling genre in 2013. So we put up the Kickstarter, and then we hit our goal within 26 hours. And then we made 4 times our ask within that 30-day period. Now, bear in mind, our initial ask was for $50,000, for 3 of us to work full-time on it for years. That's a very, very low number is what I'm saying. But it was really exciting. Suddenly people were interviewing us. Suddenly we were news. This thing just kind of took off and had a life of its own. And it was not the first time that I definitely forecasted doom and things kind of worked out. So around about that time was when Finji came along. Alec had some previous relationship with the Saltzmans and had worked with them. And so they came on as kind of our publisher, just kind of crossing T's and dotting I's and sending us up for talks like this. And stuff for a really long time, and none of this would have been possible without them. So after a Kickstarter, Alec and I, it's you wake up the next day and you realize you've married someone. We didn't know each other almost at all, and we wanted to get something out, but in part because there's that thing when you make a Kickstarter that everyone expects you to fail or rip people off. So we wanted to make something really fast, and also just to work together to get something out. Sometimes you just got to finish something, and so. The Kickstarter ended near the end of November, and then 10 days in December, we made a little game called Longest Night, which is this kind of cool little thing where stars would go around you, and you could kind of connect with the mouse the different stars, make a little musical notes, and then when you connect, after you kind of revealed the constellation, the characters down there would kind of expound and converse on it. It was our first time, making something, kind of feeling out our creative process for kind of trying to be flexible with mechanics and stuff. It was my first time trying to write these characters or draw them in ways that weren't in the trailer. You can see Greg kind of looks like a ventriloquist dummy down there. It's just it was early days, but it was this kind of foundational moment. And we made it we seriously released it an hour before each of us went home for Christmas. Alec finished it, and he went to the airport in Vancouver and flew back to Winnipeg, and Bethany and I got in the car and were just hurtling through the night to central Pennsylvania. And I remember like looking at my phone and seeing like, oh, this is weird. What a weird year this has been, as I'm watching people like on Twitter going, oh, Night in the Woods, they released a game. That's weird. Is this what the whole game is going to be like? I don't like this, if this is going to be the whole thing, but it's kind of a cool small thing. And I was like, wow, people on Twitter are talking about our game. This is so weird. 7 months ago, I'd never even met Alec. I wasn't thinking about doing video games at all, but now we'd released a tiny little game, and this was our full-time jobs. So here's the thing. I could keep doing this, where I'm giving you the play-by-play of like every month, but Alec and I did that talk last year, and it took 2.5 hours. So from here, I'm going to kind of switch to talking about some of the design lessons, kind of giving you a design history of the rest of the game, and just some kind of some general things that we came up with. There were rules for us and things that we discovered as we went through. I was told that one of the purposes of these talks is to be helpful. Hopefully some of this is helpful. So we didn't start working on the game full-time until Valentine's Day the next year, because like when you start a Kickstarter, you don't just go, hi, I'm starting a Kickstarter, goodbye to jobs. Like, you know, because you don't know if it's going to work out. So we had like stuff left over that we still had to finish. Like Alec had work. I was making a cell phone commercial. I was animating it and all that. So we couldn't really start working. But like right after that, the GDC was coming up, and we made this little demo for it because we wanted to debut it at GDC. So within like 6 weeks, maybe, we made this like really super early demo. Like, I don't even think we have it anymore. I kind of wish I did, because it would just be hilarious to look at now. And Alec brought it here and demoed it, and people were like, oh, this is cool, but also this part sucks, and like all that, and that kind of, you know, feedback you get. And so we took that and we're like, okay, cool, we can fix this part and do this and whatever. This jump doesn't work. What were we thinking? And then soon afterwards, it was announced, you know, we'd been talking to Sony, and they announced that we were going to launch on their on PS4, and they said, hey, come to E3 this year. And we were like, okay, we can't go to E3. No, that's ridiculous. But we spent the next couple months kind of polishing up and expanding on that GDC demo. And one thing that we learned really quickly was kind of a general rule that I just put into words yesterday. This is a really nice way of saying that we decided early on that like this game was going to be about characters and in a story, in a place, and that was going to lead. We weren't going to come up with like our one mechanic and then like do different permutations on it throughout the entire thing and build all of it around that, build the themes, build everything around that. Oh, that's applause next door. So I was like, it's really raining out there. So but we decided, like, yeah, these moments, these like other things were going to kind of drive what we were doing mechanically with the game. We decided that really early on. A really great example of this was we just played this game called Gone Home, which you might have heard of. This like era-defining, brilliant little game, Gone Home. And one of the things we liked about it was like a lot of Gone Home was like you're wandering around like a house, but then you're just like, oh, there's a water bottle. You know, you could pick it up and spin it around and look at it. We jokingly were calling it like first-person rummaging, like you're like a raccoon. You know, like this is how a raccoon experiences your trash can. You know, so and we thought that was really cool, and we're like, it would be cool to like be able to like, because you're in the game, you're kind of in like a side-scrolling view, and like we wanted to get you up close into the world, you know, to mess with the garbage again, like a raccoon. And so Alec had this, in this moment of brilliance, came up with the name for it, pause mode. It's a great little pun that I've been laughing at for like 3 years. So there's a thing, you know, like in movies or TV shows where they'll have like a real animal sitting there, and they'll have like a fake paw, right? And they'll be like driving like or something, or playing ping pong, or like stirring soup with a ladle. And it's just like a stick with like dog fur on it and like a fake paw at the end. For some reason, Alec, Bethany, and I think this is the funniest thing in the world, and so that's how we designed Maze Paws. That's why they're just like on sticks. And one of the reasons, like when I talk about design following the moment, is because we're like, oh, we want to do this thing. Let's just make a mode where that works. You know, in doing that, we So we were making this E3 demo, and we built all these things. We built this town out. We built this little storyline you could go through. We wrote so much stuff. And we, at the end, we're like, we could put a scene where you eat donuts at the end of this we could debut pause mode, you know? And we could explain to everyone, see, get it, pause, but you could pause in games. Anyway, whatever. And so, like, so we kind of put that in like last minute, like the day before we had to ship it off to E3. And so we went to E3. Here's our game next to under these giant jumbotrons of like The Order 1886 and Metal Gear Solid 5. And then here's like our game where like you're like sitting on the counter talking to your mom. And we were like, no one's gonna play this. No one's gonna like want to read this much on the GDC or on the E3 floor. All these acronyms. And we had like headphones and stuff, so like people would like put on this like headphones and they would just drift off. Like we thought that it was going to be about 15 to 20 minutes to get through the demo. People were spending like almost an hour in it, just like every line of dialogue. May had a little journal you can get doodles in that we ended up using the game, and and people would like every single thing. And you know, it was this really kind of like moment where like there was one point a woman was playing it, and she turned around, she took off the headphones after spending like 45 minutes at it, and she had like tears in her eyes, and she came up and she's like, I've just never seen a game that was just made for like me before, and she like gave me this hug, and I'm like, this is an experience I'm having on the E3 floor right now. And I remember another thing was like, so, you know, again, people getting their faces shotgunned off on these jumbotrons behind us, and this one guy finished it and turned around and said, guys, this game that you're making is really dark. The other great one from that is a guy went up to Alec, like he played for a little bit, and there's a part where you have to, like, you're talking to your mom and stuff, and he kind of like puts the thing aside, he turns to Alec and goes, when does the adventure begin? It was just this whole range of things. Here's Alec and I when we first met. Alec has a beard then, he doesn't have now, so this is evil Alec. This is his evil twin, you can tell because of the beard. And so people had these like really close experiences with this. We won some awards at that E3, which we were like, whoa, I still have this in my house, because the first time anyone was ever like, you made a good thing. But you know what people liked the most? The donuts. Out of all these other things, everyone was like, oh my God, the donuts. Like, it was so great. But when we started off the game, we were thinking like, oh, this could be maybe some Metroidvania-ish stuff. We're gonna hop around and unlock these different things and like unlock these different areas and all that. There's gonna be progression, maybe some like big puzzles and like some more like kind of traditional narrative platform things. But by this point, like all that was out the window. We're like, we're just gonna make this weird game where you're like reading your journal and drawing in it, and you're like eating donuts, and you're hopping around on rooftops, and you're feeding rats with pretzels that you stole. These are all things that happen in the game. And looking through telescopes and all these other things, it changed and it got weirder, and it's because we were open to like kind of, like I said, letting the design kind of follow the moment, and it kind of started evolving. One of the things we started doing a lot was improvising. We would just be like, oh, there's a knife fight part in this scene. Let's just make a knife fight. Let's see how that goes. And we mock it up, and a lot of times it would be like, okay, that works. And then we'd flesh it out and work on it a bit. But a lot of these kind of different things kind of came from just, oh yeah, let's do that, that's cool. And so like, for example, that led to all these like little like small things we called exceptions. They were exceptions to your normal rules of gameplay. And so like the knife fighting was an exception. The game is not about, you know, bass playing, for example, but the game is about being in May's position. And one of the cool things about improvising and doing these little things is after a while, you just stop really caring if these things can carry a game on its own. There's like a tension that you want to make sure every mini game could be its own game, right? It's the most polished, balanced thing. But the imbalance can actually be fun if it like doesn't last very long, or it can like reveal character. We don't prep you at all for this bass playing game when it comes. And a lot of times when we watch people streaming, they're like, oh shit, why am I playing the bass now? I don't know how to do any of this. But in the game, May doesn't know what she's doing either. She hasn't played bass in years. She doesn't know the songs at all. So her panic is your panic at that point. You failing and not being able to play this mini game is like, you know, if that's what happens to you, fits perfectly well with the plot of what's happening. And that was like a lot of fun. And that was just like, that kind of like lit our path and going, oh, we can just try a bunch of different stuff. And if it fits with the game, like, let's just do it. Okay, cool. My favorite example of like a weird improvisation thing was, so there's a part where May kind of dies for a little bit after she gets electrocuted. It's a long story. And and I was sitting at the coffee shop in our neighborhood where like we wrote like half the game, and I was like, you know, it would be funny if the little Bonzi Buddy desktop friend that May has, Sharkle the Shark, on her laptop. It'd be funny if he appeared to her in like the afterlife. That would be funny. And so I was like, oh, this is hilarious. And so I wrote I kind of wrote it out and I sent it to Alec and I was like, does this sound good? And he's like, oh yeah, no, that's really funny. And so by 7 p.m. that entire scene was in. Just art, music, everything, you know, and that's it. And it didn't change, I don't think, from there till release. And it's one of my favorite kind of moments of the game. And a lot of these little moments that we're trying to like design ended up being like some of our favorite and a lot of people who played the game's favorite moments in the game. And this leads us to another thing. Go simple so that you can be generous. We talked a lot about generosity when we were making the game. A good example of like a really generous game, like that kind of rewards poking around, just kind of keeps giving you stuff. You just cram so much interesting things in there, is Symphony of the Night, which is this Castlevania game. You guys know what Symphony of the Night is. And I think this might have been like they thought that they weren't going to be able to make another one, or maybe this team or something. They just crammed all these ideas into it, like boots that you can get that make you 1 pixel higher, and like little jokes everywhere. Like when you can beat the castle so that it flips upside down, and you beat it again, and it's all different. There's like all these different things, and you're like fighting and hacking and slashing all over the place. But there's this one room, it's kind of spoken up in these kind of like hallowed tones, like among some people who are into the game. So you're in this cathedral in Dracula's castle because Dracula's apparently a churchgoer, and off to the side there's this room, and the music is really somber. It's really calm, and all that's in there is this confessional booth, and you can sit down on either side of it, and eventually like a little ghost will appear and either kind of confess to you or kind of take your confession. And sometimes they stab you, but you can't do anything else. That's it. It's just a room to have this weird moment happen. And so the idea of having these kind of calm moments, these little like off to the side places that you can just sit. There's a lot of places in our game where you just sit. And sometimes you'll end up talking to someone. Sometimes it's just there for sitting, and that's it. But us being able to be generous and like try to like put all these like little moments in the game that if you poke at, you'll be rewarded from. We could do that because we kind of went simple. So another thing is just going low res on stuff. Another game we talked about a whole bunch when we were making it is Final Fantasy VI. There's a part where you're, opera, low res, and they got so much performance out of their little like cast of little sprite characters who are like flopping all over the place and like crying and like living and dying and all this stuff, and you buy it when you're watching it. It's like little puppets or something. That lack of expressiveness, that low fidelity, sells it and gives them like so much range that if you were doing like full-on like capture and high fidelity and everything, it would take you hundreds of millions of dollars, zillions of dollars, and take you forever to do. But you can do it with so little. And we didn't have access to a whole lot. At the time, we were running our dialogue out of Twine, but that wasn't giving us everything we needed, and was like I think creating a lot of more work for Alec to kind of get from there to it being in the game. And so out of that was born Yarn, which is a name that I came up with based on Twine, and that was my big contribution to the project. And it allowed us to do a bunch of different things. John down there, John Manning, and his team expanded on it with Yarn Spinner, and eventually we had all this functionality in it, and it was such that even I could like hop in there and like do like these like long dialogue sequences and stuff. And one of the things we ended up doing, speaking of lo-fi, was we started making it so that, well, to trigger animations of like different expressions and common things, we would use emoticons. So end up with May says a line, smiley face, and she'd smile at the end of it, or she'd go like this, or wave her arms. Greg's whole that's an emoji, an emoticon, like. And that was kind of again like there a lot went into it, but it's a pretty simple solution of doing that, just mixing and matching these kind of like lo-fi things. Speaking of lo-fi, we had to make the characters kind of based around this, these simple characters that just walked and talked and didn't do much. I didn't have a lot of help when it came to the art for most of it. My friend Charles Huttner came on and helped out. He designed Bruce who is one of my favorite characters in the game. I think it's the best designed characters. He designed this guy. He didn't make it into the game. But I think one of the things is that like this kind of like you can have an opera with 16 pixel high characters and sell it. You know, like a lot of people remember that Final Fantasy opera scene and are like, I cried, you know? And you look at it and it's just like these little guys going, you know? You don't need a lot. You really don't need a lot. Like no matter how many facial polygons you have, you're never going to suddenly like happen upon emotion or human drama as like a hardware feature, you know? No matter how good your facial capture is, how many polygons are in your face, like that's not going to create emotion. You have to do that with the actual characters and the story and all these things that aren't as sexy to talk about. Expressiveness was a thing we talked about a lot. We made another supplemental game the year after Longest Night called Lost Constellation. We made it about 5 or 6 weeks at the end of 2014, and that's we were kind of sprinting through it. That becomes a problem later on in this talk. And expressiveness was, I think, a thing that Alec talked about a lot, and it was just like giving the character, the player, the ability to kind of mess around in that world and express themselves. In the game, you're kind of talking. It's framed as like a fairy tale that May's grandfather is telling her. And when she's young, wandering through these woods, and you make these snowmen, and you can put these little found items in them, and the people who own those items like inhabit the snowmen, like regular snowmen. And we're like, oh, cool. Well, why don't we make a way for you to take these various items, and you can make the snowmen faces yourself. And so these are just a couple I pulled off the internet of things that people did. You know, same items. But people just made so many of them, and they loved them. And we actually put in a little camera button, you can see down there in the lower right, that would export out like a ping or a JPEG or something to your desktop, and people were like posting them, and it was a really neat little moment. I like this guy. And that expressiveness like paid off, and people loved it. And we were trying to, and we brought that back into the main game in a lot of different ways. Lost Constellation was also a proof of concept for a lot of things that we wanted to try in the game, particularly when it came to exploration. A thing about exploration is I think that exploration is one of the highest things, the best things you can do in a game. Like both as like a developer and like as a player. Like exploring, finding things, finding secrets, like seeing the whole like layout of something, and like is one of the, I think the best things you can do in a game. And that doesn't just come with like exploring like a landmass. It's exploring a story. It's exploring dialogue. It's exploring characters. All those are different ways of exploration. But exploration doesn't mean a lot if you can't miss things. Like, it becomes this precious thing, this interesting thing if you can miss it. Like, there's a thing when you're a developer where you want to make sure everyone sees all of your beautiful work, right? Like, we can't let anyone miss anything at all. But we wanted you to be able to miss things if you didn't think to go and poke or whatever. Not to, like, punish you, but to allow there to be kind of the unknown out there. That people could have different experiences. Lost Constellation, we had a whole storyline in our tiny little game that we made in 5 weeks that you don't see if you don't think to go and do certain things. And people responded to it. To end this little design section, there was a part in Lost Constellation, this little throwaway bit, that involved all the things I just talked about. Designing for the moment, improvising, trying to be generous, low-res solutions, and expression and exploration. There's a cliff in Lost Constellation, and we're like, okay, well, what do we do with this cliff? I mean, the player could just jump off it. Are we going to have a death state? We don't want to do that. We just reset it. We're like, no. So we're like, but what if you jump off the cliff, that's little May, since the framing device this is a story being told to little May. What if she's just jumping in and going, and then she jumped off a cliff? And the grandfather's like, no, she didn't. Just shut up. I'm going to keep telling the story. And we're like, ha, ha, ha. And they're like, what if you jump off the cliff again? And we're like, and May's like, she jumped off the cliff again. The grandfather's like, okay, all right, we're just going to keep going. And you could do that 15 or 17 times, and we just kept adding this little story. You could just keep doing it. Eventually, he starts reading her a kid's book that she hates called Charity Bearity, which is this little like very like cloying, like it's all in rhyme, everyone learns a lesson. He starts reading the book to you if you keep jumping off the cliff. And eventually he's like, okay, fine, I'm going to stop telling the story if you don't shut up. And that's when we put up the invisible wall. that was a moment. It's one of the tiniest moments in our games, but it's one that it's, I think, the most proud of, because it was all those things, and it was just a moment of us. Let's just try this, and it worked. And like almost no one finds it at all. I've watched a whole bunch of people play this game. Like 5 people found it, you know. But it's a great thing, I think, and it's something that I'm really, really proud of. So those are all like design things. This is like the design talk. But there's a lot of things that go into design that aren't just like mechanics, right? The game has a lot of ideas in it, has a lot of context in it. And a lot of things that we did, we wanted to, we had some things to say, and we had some ideas, and they came out through it. Unsolvable puzzles and unproficient, which I found out is an actual word yesterday. May isn't a character that is good at things, really, other than hopping on things. Like, she's not smarter than you. She does not make better life decisions than you. She is not tougher. She is not more clever. Like, so many games are about people who can do amazing things. But that's a really constrained kind of story that you can tell. Like, the story of the person who is really good at something is so many games, and that's like a really specific thing. Or like the story of, for example, the space captain who can sleep with up to half of the people in their ship, you know, depending on how they play their cards. That super attractive, extremely charming boss is a very, very specific kind of character, and you have to tell a specific kind of story. But that is like such a constrained kind of story that you can tell. By giving May, by not giving her that level of proficiency, by not giving her puzzles that she can solve, May is not going to bring back like the mining industry to her town. May is not going to suddenly cure all of her mental health problems. You know, in the game, like a lot of the game is her coming to terms with both of those things. Those things don't have a really quick solution to them. You can't power up and get rid of all that immediately. All those things are difficult. With mental health, you can get help, and that's a thing that May kind of like, you know, learns, I think, throughout the game. But a lot of these other things, like these are struggles you don't necessarily have access to all the time. And that leads us to a thing, kind of a pun, and the piggybacking on that idea is Alec early on was really gracious and let Bethany and I kind of go where we wanted with the story. And he, like, you know, obviously collaborative, but he trusted us a lot at the beginning, which was really cool. I had early on played the game called Cart Life, and Cart Life was, I think, the first time I saw some of my own experiences with being broke and being desperate and being afraid in a video game, and to the point where I couldn't finish it. I was having panic attacks by the end of it. As we went on, it became clear that we couldn't write about these people and these places that we knew without going into the actual politics of it. And like that's scary sometimes in games, but we kind of couldn't avoid it. It would be the themes that we had of like mental health, of like capitalism, of loss of belief in God, the removal of kind of a central organizing force in your life, which a lot of these things kind of have that feeling to them. You kind of can't just, you know, take those aesthetics and slap them on. So we talked about it really directly. One character reads this poem where, how far is Silicon Valley from here? I'm in it. Okay, cool. We talk about burning it to the ground in this game. We're kind of kidding, but we wanted to talk about that because, you know, from where we were sitting, there's this massive level of inequality and power and wealth and all these different things, and we don't have access to that. Everyone we know is like desperate and just trying to get by. That's where we were, honestly, before this Kickstarter. And so we were just trying to be honest about it. And there's a lot of things where games that are celebrated for their mature politics often will just take the aesthetics of a struggle and then look at it solemnly and go, yes, we've made a serious game. We're very grown up as video games now. You know, you could, you know, you have like these kind of famous devs who are like, yeah, we're going to use all this really charged imagery, say from like, you know, Jim Crow or something, and we're going to put that in the game. And then like, let's say the character goes to an alternate dimension where suddenly all the black people have the guns and they're just like killing white children everywhere. And then the takeaway is extremism is bad. Like, it's tourism. It's a kind of tourism. You take these struggles, you take these real live issues in these real live places, and you just say, yeah, that's a thing. We're grown up, and then we'll make some kind of just general, both sides are bad, or conflict is bad. We should just really check it out type of thing, where everything is just kind of this equivocating thing. And it's celebrated in games, and it drove us nuts because everybody hates a tourist. To quote Pulp, the song Common People. So we were just like, no, we're going to speak honestly about the things, not to like preach at people, because we weren't trying to make a game that was trying to blow people's minds. Like, did you know that there's poor people in a place called the Rust Belt that are like getting screwed over by capitalism, and it's this really whatever? We weren't doing that. We were trying to make myths for ourselves. We were trying to talk about these things that we cared about. And people like politics and games if we can look at it kind of from like a not in my backyard way. Like it's over there. We went away and we saw a political struggle. So if you talk about like labor, if you talk about, thank you, I just got the I'm going to have to wrap it up soon thing. If you talk about labor, if you talk about labor in the games industry, if you talk about the need for workers to kind of organize in that space, people suddenly start getting whatever. If you talk about that happening on like a space colony somewhere, people are like, all right, well in the future they'll have to deal with that. But if you talk about it now, people suddenly start like, oh, it's in my backyard now. People are like, oh, this might affect me. This is really, really uncomfortable. If you talk about like GDC, you talk about the unpaid labor and underpaid labor that goes on here and the profit that's made by the company here, all these different things, people start getting really whatever. I think that being able to just be honest and make kind of mythologies of our own about the people we knew and the things that we struggled with and just kind of not bullshit about it, that was kind of like a really kind of big thing. Bethany did so much like research and so much like looking into kind of her own past and the place where she's from, and it was like, and the kind of issues there, and makes up so much of the bedrock, kind of the dirt underneath this game, that and like for every time that I'll talk about anything I just talked about and it makes you kind of like someone uncomfortable, there's 10 people who are like, thank God someone said something, right? A thing that art can do is tell people that they're not alone. That is one of the best things it can do. Being able to speak honestly about these like topics and just be upfront about it, and not kind of try to just have this kind of these aesthetics of it, means that you can kind of connect with people in a way that you can otherwise. One of the last things is just do what you can with what you have. Bethany and Alec and I all brought the things that we were okay at to begin with. We learned a whole bunch of new things, but we were just like, let's see where this goes. Let's see where, what we can like pull out of this, what we can kind of make and kind of collaborate together. This is one of the first times I think all of us were in a room together back in like 2016. And then here's us like a year later, much more tired. Some of the hard lessons that we learned from this was crunch. We crunched ourselves nearly to death. Me, literally, I almost died by the end of it, according to my doctor. I think that was a hard lesson. We sprinted for like 3.5 years, and it took like a lot of, like I'm still dealing with health issues from our launch like a year ago. Imagine if you're in a place where, like we're doing that to ourselves, imagine if you're in a place that your employment is in danger if that isn't done. These projects can just chew you up and spit you out. But we released the game. People liked it, which is really shocking to us. I'm sorry, shocking to me. The theme of this is I never think anything is going to work out, and then Alec goes, no, I think it'll be okay, and then it works out okay. We got lucky. We got really, really lucky. People would say, I think because we tried to be honest, people would say, hey, playing this game like saved my life. That's not us. Like when you make art or we make whatever you put out there is only part of it. Like other people meet you there, People were coming and kind of meeting us there and having these experiences and these kind of deep experiences. And we were having these kind of deep conversations with people. And we were just lucky. We were just really, really, really fortunate. From the Kickstarter, our Finji was able to get us funding to kind of sustain us through the back half of it. We, I was, never before was a game designer. Bethany never worked in games. Alec had never worked with us. All these were chances that just happened to work out. This is not like the key to success. We got lucky. Loads and loads of like amazing people do super great work, and it just doesn't kind of work out in the same way. But one of the great things about making art, in conclusion, is that we kind of committed to something that could only kind of come from us. We threw out like a lot of rules, and we committed to the moment. And we put stories and characters and themes first, and where that led. Bethany and I were novices, and we had like no experience in games, and Alec brought us on and trusted us. And we ended up pouring just ourselves and our lives into it in healthy and unhealthy ways. And it led us to this game where we could just be honest, and people were really gracious and responding. Art can tell people that they're not alone. Art can challenge and motivate and agitate. Art can change people's minds. And art can just be a place to go. Even if it isn't easy or unpleasant, we get people who are like, I just have to go back to this game every now and again because of the music, and just being there talking to the mom there every morning is this like safe, cool space for me. And we also have people who are like, this changed my outlook on a bunch of things. This changed my politics. This changed my relationships with others. This changed my relationship with myself. This put a name on a disorder that I have. This put a name on how I feel at work. Because we were just honest. We didn't really know how to do anything else. Art can show you kind of an image, good or bad, where you kind of recognize your reflection in it, like May here, People would talk about this scene where May kind of tries to hype herself up for a party, but it ends up kind of just talking about how she's gross and unattractive and weird. And someone was like, I thought that was the only person that felt like that. And I'm like, I'm 36, and I did that before coming here, So games can forge those connections with people. The art that we make can forge those connections. They can tell each other that we're not alone, and we can affect each other. And people said that that's kind of what this game did good for them. And I don't know what more you could ask for as a creator, right? Is to have people come to you and say, this thing made this connection between us. And all this like worked out, and we had just this moment together, and I didn't feel alone. So that's my time, everybody. Do we have any time left for questions? We have time for questions. OK, those are the mics. If anyone wants to ask a question. If I somehow didn't address one iota of this game, please ask.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, you have to introduce yourself and say, I'm blah from blah.
OK. Hi, I'm Lisa from New Zealand.
So
I wanted to ask, because I haven't read anywhere, why did you decide to have random little kind of like creatures and animals like squirrels and cats running around when it's a town of cat people? And
That was God's original plan for the world. No, the animal people in the game are just how I drew cartoon animal people. There's just regular animals. Why are there humans and yet there are apes? Checkmate. No, there's no reason at all. There's no reason.
Thank you.
People have puzzled about that. That is actually the #1 question we get, is there's a cat, but there's also cats? So, yeah. I hope that's a sufficient answer. Other mic.
Hi, I'm Sienna from Los Angeles.
Hey.
And I have kind of a process question, like a writing process question. So one of the things that you guys did really well in Night in the Woods, I felt, was the fact that you really had this town that felt like the people's lives in it were progressing separate from you, and you were just kind of eavesdropping on them. Like, for example, the two dudes at the bar, right, every day had their relationship evolve a little. And I was wondering if how did you go about writing those scenes? Did you choose to be like, I think there should be some people here, and then you figured out the whole thing? Or as you were going day by day, did you kind of feel like you needed more?
Okay. Yeah. Early on, I think we just had some general ideas. We wanted the world to feel alive without you. Like Alec made these great, like, what did we call it? Squirrel tech? Where like the squirrels would like run around. We made this great random car generator. Like you'll never see the same car in the game twice. And stuff. So we wanted the world to feel alive, and the world didn't need you, basically. If May was not walking down the street, those two dudes outside of like the football bar were still going to be talking and still having their ups and downs in life. And so that was it. Like I think early on it was just a funny idea, and then as we went on, it became more and more complex that there would be whole storylines and whole sagas that if you weren't around for, you'd miss it, like I was saying within the exploration part. But if you paid attention, it would be something that would give back to you, and you could learn more about it. I think one of the reasons why some folks have like really short play times and some people spend like 20 hours in the game is because some folks are really attuned to that, and they'll go and seek it out. And there's a whole lot of places all around that. So after a while, you just get a feeling for writing these little arcs and these little mini dramas. They're like some of the most interesting stories in the game, I think, are these tiny little things. And understanding that, and sometimes we had it so that they would only start when you triggered them the first time, but a lot of times it was just ongoing. And you just kind of pop in and pop out, kind of like you do in real life, because that made the world feel fuller, and it made exploration mean something. So yeah, after a while, it just became kind of second nature to do.
Thank you.
Other mic.
Hey, I'm Jasper from Australia,
Hey.
and sort of following on from that, I was wondering about, there's a lot of different moments in the game, as you talked about, that have some relation on the overall game, and some that are just self-contained.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was really nice because it kind of represented like how life is. Sorry, excuse me. And I remember you tweeted a while ago about maybe you were frustrated that people kind of felt that these were all linked and that there was some sort of overarching thing that happened that linked every single thing in the game together. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And
Okay, yeah. The football fans that were just mentioned, they're behind the whole thing, the whole game. No, there's a thing in a lot of kind of like, it's been going on for a while, but like right now I think it's a big thing of like everything has to be meta, everything has to be like plot A, like gear A of the plot here, this to turn a gear over here, or else this is just, what are you even doing and having this here? If you have a missing character, they have to show up later as that mysterious person. If there's like a villain and you don't know who it is, it has to be your dad. It has to be like these little like Christopher Nolan-esque puzzle box type things. And those things are cool, but it's not like how you can do like, that's not the way to do stories. I'm getting the wrap it up thing here. And I think that's kind of a frustration, and we wanted to avoid that. We wanted to have these episodic moments because we just liked episodic things and stories, and we wanted to have these little closed off sections that you can stumble into, like the confessional room, the story version of that. All these little things that fleshed out the world and maybe got across ideas and expressed character and themes and all these things. Like, so many things exist in the world just for that. The two guys outside of the smelters bar, they don't exist to, be main plot points. They're there in the world, and you can follow their little story and their little life, and you can kind of get like involved that way. And it's for me, and for us, I think in the game, that's where like a lot of the beauty of the world is, right? It's not just this thing that your character goes through and drives all of it. It exists without you, and other characters having their own agency that has nothing to do with you makes them more human, and it makes the story and the world more human. And I think we wanted to just have a lot of humanity in the game. So there's that. Okay, I think that's all the questions I can take, but we're going over to the wrap-up room, which is apparently right around the corner. Yeah, it's around I actually don't know where it is. It's right around the corner over there.